This is Martin Barrios reporting for Spero News. We're speaking today with our friend Bill Warner. He's the editor and founder of politicalislam.com. He's an expert in Islam and what he calls political Islam. Bill, you've said in the past that there are three kinds of Islam, or three divisions, if you will, in Islam. Which one are we dealing with now in view of the attack in Orlando?
Well, I divide Islam into religion and political system. And the political system is all that I'm concerned about. The religion of Islam holds absolutely no interest to me at all. I'm not a Muslim, have no interest in the Islamic faith. I don't care if Muslims pray 5 times a day or not at all. That's a religious question. But the most amazing thing about Islamic doctrine is that over half of it is about you and me. It's about the kafir, the non-believer. And I call this part that deals with the non-believer political Islam, because it is not religious Islam. So that's the reason I coined the term, because I saw after 9/11 that we would never defeat Islam as a religion, but we could defeat it as a political system.
The much of the discussion about the attack, which I understand 49 people have died and at least 50 or more have been wounded, is that this was a homophobic attack and that it is akin to perceived homophobia on the part of Christians. And even Christian missionaries who go overseas to preach about the sin of homosexuality. What are we to make of that?
Well, you've mentioned the word sin, which is a religious term. The part about Islam is it not only views it as a sin, but as a crime.
Oh.
And the punishment for the crime is death. So that is a major difference. You've brought up an interesting point, though. People always want to advance their learning of Islam through advancing something about Christianity or Judaism, in particular Christianity. We need to study Islam on its own basis. It has its own doctrine, its own books, its own codification. And so I actually maintain that there's nothing quite like Islam anywhere, and therefore that all analogies are really fail because of the absolute uniqueness of Islamic doctrine. We need to study it for what it is, not what it's like.
So would you call it maybe Islamic exceptionalism?
I've never heard it put that way, but yes, Islam claims to surpass and to overtake and replace all religions. It is an absolute supremacist doctrine, not only religiously. I don't care about the religious part. I'm not saying that Christians don't go to hell and that Muslims do. What I'm saying is I care how it treats someone such as myself. For instance, I'm perceived as a critic of Islam. Therefore, it's possible for me to be killed. I object to that. I dislike it and I oppose it. I think it's wrong.
Have you ever been directly threatened or subjected to a fatwa?
This is one of the most common questions I get. The 3 most common questions are, what's the difference between Sunni and Shia? Is Obama a Muslim? And have I been threatened? Actually, I have not. If you listen carefully to the way I speak, I never criticize Muslims. I merely give the doctrine that they obey and follow. And I also never ridicule. I don't even criticize Muhammad. I just say that, for instance, he was involved in 100 acts of jihad in the last 9 years of his life. I don't say he was good, bad, or indifferent. I just report the facts. And so therefore this seems to keep me away from offending Muslims.
So, pointing out facts, even. I mean, the fact that Muhammad married a preteen seems to anger some Muslims too.
Well, it may anger them, but it doesn't, in a strange way, offend them, because I'm not saying that Muhammad was a bad man. As an example, some people call Muhammad a pedophile. I never use that term in describing him. I merely say, according to the hadith of Bukhari, that he married her at 6 and consummated the marriage at 9. I don't criticize that fact. I don't say anything bad about it. I just say these are the facts as portrayed in the hadith.
Well, that's a good distinction to make. But, going on to political Islam, do you see any common? I guess what I'm wondering is if is there a common enemy for Islam with other political systems? Let's say those of a socialist bent.
It's against all political systems. The Hadith says that I've been ordered to wage war against the Kafir until every one of them admits there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. So it is a universal approach to all political systems. It is the doctrine of political Islam that it must replace all forms of government.
But they have the doctrine too of what is it, taqiyya? I don't know if I've got the correct pronunciation, that that one can dissimulate allegiance or alliance with one party so as to defeat another one, or to lie in order to advance political Islam.
A Muslim may lie, but the doctrine never lies. That's the reason I stay strictly with the doctrine. I don't quote Muslims, I quote Muhammad, I quote Allah. They never lie. They also tell you the complete truth. The biggest lie that you get out of Muslims when you ask about Islam is they tell you about the good part, but not all of it. But the doctrine never lies.
So, how are we to interpret, when we get, official, I don't know whether we could call them officials, but let's say an organization like the Council on American Islamic Relations that says, well, this is not true Islam. This man who committed this act was, deranged, or, whatever adjective you want to use, but it doesn't represent true Islam. What's that if not a kind of dissimulation?
But again, they may be dissimulating, but Muhammad does not dissimulate, nor does Allah. If I want to judge what Iqar says, I go to Muhammad and I go to Allah. If they agree with Muhammad and Allah, then they're right. If they disagree with him, they're either ignorant or dissembling.
So they're correct as to advancing the political cause? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is they may use deceit to advance a political cause, but I can always tell whether they're deceiving me a lot because I simply ask, does it agree with Muhammad? Does it agree with Allah? If it does, it's true. So, and by the way, Muhammad advised deception. So to be deceiving is not to be un-Islamic.
Where was an instance where Muhammad himself advised deceit?
I'm going to quote you a hadith. Ashraf was a Jewish poet who wrote a poem mocking Muhammad. Muhammad, who will kill Ashraf, who has offended Allah and his prophet? A Muslim. I will, Muhammad, but I will need to deceive him. May I do so? Muhammad, deceive him. And he deceived him, and he killed him.
So,
now we have to understand here that Muhammad is the perfect Muslim. There are 91 verses in the Quran which state that everything that he says and does is the perfect pattern of the sacred life for all human beings.
So no other perfect Muslims?
Nope, he is the measure of perfection. Every Muslim is to attempt to imitate him.
So,
and he was a jihadist.
Right. Now, this incident in Orlando, is that to be taken as typical of the Islamic way of war?
Well, Muhammad said this. I've been given 5 things that no one has been given before. One of those is to cast terror into the hearts of the kafir. That is, the method of Islam, the method of jihad, is to use terror as part of its weapon, as a tactic or technique, which he's successfully done.
So, I guess I just, when I see developments such as the admission of more than 1 million mostly Muslims from North Africa and from South Asia, the Middle East to Europe, and then calls by the United Nations to bring in over 100,000 into our country, I just have to wonder about a commonality of vision on the part of Western governments that may, wittingly or not, align themselves with the goals of political Islam. Do you see that at all?
Oh, perfectly. How could we... Look, let's talk about law enforcement for the moment. If law enforcement is supposed to oppose jihadists, would they not be supposed to study the doctrine of jihad? But our own law enforcement, CIA FBI has been given direct orders by the Obama administration that they can only bring in Muslim Brotherhood operatives to talk to them about Islam. So therefore, we're not able to fight something that we're not allowed to understand.
Where's an instance of where a lack of understanding on the part of American national security officials has had a concrete result in the United States?
I was called by one of the second-tier heads of one of the alphabet agencies who knew about me, and he wanted to have a cup of coffee with me. He said, we're being hamstrung by the fact that our language is not allowed to be used that's a proper language. To think the right thoughts, you need to be able to use the right language. He said, the word jihad is now forbidden to be used in memos or anywhere else in meetings. So if you have people who are not allowed to use the right words, they can't think the right thoughts. We get wacky stuff like, we're combating violent extremism.
Was it significant that today President Obama referred to the incident as domestic terrorism, but then didn't mention the word Islam or Muslim?
Oh, really? I am shocked, I tell you. Now, Obama does everything he can to let us not look at the true doctrine of what's killing this nation, which is the doctrine of political Islam. He refuses to let it be studied. It was his agent, his attorney general, who issued the direct order to the CIA and FBI that they would not study the doctrine of Islam by anybody except approved sources.
And has it been only Muslim Brotherhood sources? I mean, Muslim Brotherhood sources. The Muslim Brotherhood was defeated by our supposed client, General al-Sisi in Egypt. So
it was in the first 5 years of Obama administration. Steve Emerson did an analysis of the visiting logs and found there were over 300 visits from Muslim Brotherhood representatives. So we may have defeated him in Egypt, but not here.
300 visits where?
To the White House.
To the White House.
Yes.
And what would be the purpose of these meetings or their substance? Would you say?
Well, I think we see what the purpose is, and I think we see the result. We see the fact that we're not able to name the enemy or call out the enemy. And by the way, let me not pick on Obama here. It was Bush who first said it's a war on terror.
Well, yeah, that's true.
It was Bush who told us Islam is the religion of peace. Both Republicans and Democrats are both equally guilty of wanting to not face the fact that we have an enemy. Have you ever noticed that in the war on terror we've never named the enemy?
I'm going to guess that in some instances, some in the Obama administration may be like Pogo, who said, we've met the enemy and he is us.
Well, you know, that's what we're told, that we're the problem with Islam. We're told that if we only treated Muslims better, that there wouldn't be any Islamic problem, that it's our fault that Muslims do what they do because we don't understand them enough and treat them well enough.
So is that truly the problem? That, you know, because then, you know, for example, one of the leading attorneys of the ACLU said over the weekend after the massacre that it's Christian conservatives who have contributed to a climate of homophobia and hatred that brought about this incident.
This is a statement given by someone who is obviously willing to display his complete and absolute and total ignorance on the subject of homosexuality and Islam.
So, why would this man have attacked a gay nightclub, and then there are also reports that he spared people who, when he asked them what their race was, he said that he asked people whether they were African American, and thus spared. So, why would this man have attacked a gay nightclub, and then there are also reports that he spared people who, when he asked them what their race was, he said that he asked people whether they were African American, and thus spared them.
Have no idea. This is brand new news to me.
But why? But why would he? Why would he attack? A gay club. Why not a church? Why not a railway station?
Let's stop and look here. Since 9/11, there's been over 20,000 acts of jihad around the world. We're focusing on one as though we're a freak show. This is simply part of the drumbeat of jihad. To focus too much on why this one is to ignore the other thousands that have happened. There is a systemic doctrine of jihad. That's what we need to face, not the peculiarities of any one incident. I'm saying, well, the West, the people of a democratic, capitalist bent. I mean, how are we to address this political Islam, given that we are tolerant as to religion and we revere the rule of law and transparency? Well, you've asked the most important question in the interview, and the answer is this. It's the Islam, stupid. It's about political Islam, and we need to defeat political Islam not with bullets and bombs, not with law enforcement, but in the same way that we defeat any political system. First off, we study and know what we're dealing with. Everyone needs to become coherent on the subject of Islamic doctrine that deals with the kafir, that is political Islam, not the religious part of Islam, but the political part. We need to know it. We need to understand it. We need to hold every Muslim responsible for the complete doctrine of Islam, which includes jihad. So it's an ideological war, not a war of bullets and bombs. So we need to all know Islam. That's the way we will defeat Islam.
Now, you've written several books about the subject. Which of those volumes would you recommend to a novice?
I've written a book called Sharia Law for the Non-Muslim. It's sold roughly 70 to 80,000 copies. It's been translated into 15 languages. It's a very inexpensive little book, and it's designed to be easy to understand. So I would suggest you start with Sharia Law for the Non-Muslim.
What can you give us a little bit of a hint of what would we find in that volume, in that book?
Well, what we would find is the Sharia covers every aspect of how to be a human being. Everything from eating, bathroom habits, sex, marriage, being a parent, how to pray, how to practice jihad, how to practice deception, the Islamic views on art, animals. It gives a complete broad spectrum analysis of the doctrine of Islam. And it's a very small book. I think it's about 70 pages.
I'm reminded that, many people who have a cursory knowledge of history will point to, the ejection of Muslims from Spain along with many Jews back in 1492. But what a lot of people don't know is that Muslims were tolerated right into the 1700s, when there was there was a deportation. They weren't slaughtered, they weren't divested of their possessions, but they're put on ships and sent back to Morocco. Would this perhaps elegant policy be something to emulate?
We are Americans, and we always want to know, well, what are we going to do? But I've told you, before we do anything, before we make any plans, before we do any strategy, we need to understand the true nature of the enemy. Sun Tzu in The Art of War has two pieces of advice. First, know yourself, and then know the enemy. We barely know ourselves, and we certainly do not know the enemy. So before we start discussing solutions, we need to discuss the nature of the problem, and we need to discuss the true history of Islam. It includes much more than Spain. And by the way, if Islam were such a wonderful thing in Spain, why did the Spanish fight for 700 years in over 200 battles to get rid of them?
Well, I can appreciate that. Santiago y adentro España. I'm of Spanish heritage, so I'm well aware of that legacy. Well, I want to thank.
By the way, there is a wonderful new book that's out now called The Myth of Andalus.
Oh, who wrote that?
Send me an email and I'll get you the information. Well, just a second. I've got the cover right here in my hand. His name is Dario Fernandez Morea. The Myth of the Andalusian Paradise.
I think I know him. Well, Bill, I want to thank you again for your pithy and prescient analysis, and I want to commend once again to our listeners his website, politicalislam.com. Bill is a scholar of Islam, and as well as a number of other things, and it's always a pleasure to have him here on Spero News.